I received your email.
How was last night?
Okay, I think we got everyone filing in. So in about 1 minute, what we're going to do, we're just going to roll with like you kind of being the full-on opener. We'll do all our, housekeeping notes, etc. afterwards. But I'll just give you a brief intro if that's cool.
Yep.
It's mostly the work you've produced, etc. that I'm super excited about. So just,
Great.
Okay, I'm going to close this door. Hello. Welcome to the second day and the first morning of DogeCon Vancouver. So we are going to start. We are going to do all our housekeeping notes, etc. after the morning keynote. We are beaming in Jaya Clara Brecca from London. It's evening time there, and she's been patiently awaiting. So we're just going to launch directly into her keynote, and then we're going to have our whole welcome, here's how DogeCon works spiel. And then we're going to have thematic panels throughout the day and one more keynote from Bob Summerwell to close. So I find that if we have this sort of a structure for content, and especially something that's more about engaging and dialogue, it tends to be less hectic. It tends to give us more space to think and to kind of step outside and talk about the ideas that are coming up here. So I reached out to Jaya because of some work that she produced that really means a lot to me and that is kind of the cornerstone of how I shaped content for this. I was always keeping an eye on the Satoshi's Oath for Developers that she produced with B9 Labs. And just in general, Jaya is a researcher, artist, thinker around societal issues, around control, around ethics, and just around, I see the work I've seen of yours, I see as very looking towards the transformative, how we can break through the mold in some very, I think, decentralist ways. So yeah, Jaya, if you want to just roll with it, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Chelsea. Can everyone hear me all right? Is the sound working?
Yes. Yeah.
Hey, cool. Okay, I can hear everyone, but I can't see anybody. So stay loud. Okay, I'm going to start with reading the Satoshi Oath for Developers, and then I thought I would explain a little bit the kind of background for the oath, and also a little bit what I see as the limitations of it. Chelsea, is it possible to just turn the audio off your end, because I'm getting a bit of feedback from my own voice here? Like, just so I can. Is that possible?
Yes.
I'm hearing lots of echo as well. Great, nice one. And you hear me fine? Cool. Is that you turning me around?
Big thumbs up, oh boy. Show her the audience.
Yeah, working on it.
Hello, everyone. Brilliant. Okay, once I'm stable, then okay, great. So this is Satoshi Oath for Developers. This is what it sounds like. When you're developing your own blockchain-based application, you're not just making another app or involved in another startup. You're taking part in creating a new form of society. This oath is designed as a practical guide and a symbolic initiation into a community of developers with an expanded view of blockchain development. By taking this oath, you pledge to consider the full extent and range of the people and environments your work might affect, with special attention to the most marginalized and those that are not represented, and to consider each point below in the design and development of new applications. The blockchain has its roots in Bitcoin, which was a response to corrupt, centralized, and opaque power structures that became explicit in the financial crisis of 2008. The core values that inspired its designs are therefore decentralization, openness, and neutrality. But these values cannot be fully guaranteed by the technical architecture alone and must be considered for each project that is undertaken. A decentralized computer network does not guarantee decentralized power. Code and cryptography does not guarantee neutrality. And openness does not guarantee legibility. And then the oath has 3 main headers with a couple of kind of to-do questions underneath each of them. The first header is immutability. Immutability is essential for decentralized trust, but change is inevitable and necessary. Not every contingency can be anticipated. Data might be incorrect or hurt someone. Context change and protocols need to adapt over time. So under immutability, we've got change. I pledge to consider who or what has the power to determine change in the protocol or data, and how to make this power visible and accountable. And then we have power. I pledge to think of the full range of people and environments that might be affected by changes and consider how their voices might be represented. And the next header is neutrality. Neutrality is an ideal that should be strived for, but is never fully realized because all systems operate on a set of assumptions about how the world works, what people want, and how they behave. When these assumptions are encoded into a system, they become automatically reinforced, invisible, and harder to change. And under neutrality, we've got delegation. I pledge to consider the assumptions and biases of the application or platform I'm developing and how these are delegated to and enforced continuously through the code. We've also got disclosure. I pledge to make these assumptions and biases visible in all the languages, code, and human-based necessary to make these understandable to all those who might be affected. And the next header is decentralization. Decentralization is a primary aim and attribute of the blockchain, but in practice, one version of decentralization might clash with another. If it becomes compulsory to take part in a decentralized system, the system itself becomes an oppressive authority in its own right. And under decentralization, we've got dissensus. I pledge to consider the possibility of and consequences for disagreeing with decisions and developments of the system for all types of people. And we've got exodus. I pledge to consider the possibility and consequences of leaving the system, platform, or application for all types of people and to make that possible. And the final point is, and beyond, I pledge to consider my limitations and seek advice from colleagues in other fields relevant to my work when needed. So that's the oath. And I wrote it, I guess, a couple of years ago now. It was commissioned by B9 Lab, which is an online developer training course. And they basically asked me to write a kind of ethical module for the course, and also to create what they asked for as a Hippocratic oath for developers. So a kind of ethical guideline. I kind of changed it a little bit to more of a questioning format. So what I wanted the oath to be not just a kind of something that people can sign and then throw away, but for it to be something that can kind of be used continuously in development processes. So something that can be actively like taken up whenever, you know, something is being considered a new startup or whatever else, and really to go through these questions, to think through all these kind of potential areas and people that might be affected by the project. So what I wanted to, maybe just to give a bit of background about who I am. Chelsea introduced me a little bit, but I'm basically, would it be possible to maybe turn on the sound again? Because I'm feeling a little bit like I can't really situate myself in the space. There we go, that's better. Yeah, nice. So the work that I do in my research basically is a lot about tracing, I guess, concepts like the ones that I've used in the oath, and how these concepts change and develop over time and change and develop as they shift across different contexts and different disciplines. So when you have, like, for example, a word like consensus, The kind of way that consensus is encoded and articulated in the kind of Nakamoto consensus is quite different from, say if you think about consensus as it operates in an assembly, on a square, in a demonstration, or these kinds of things, and to really look closely at those dynamics and what they're supposed to do in each specific context is quite important in order to know what kinds of technologies are appropriate for that situation. But so that's part of the work that I do. I'm currently writing a PhD at Durham University. I'm also with UCL here in London with the computer engineering department, where I'm working on some projects with them. And then I work with a research and let's say cultural collective called RIAT, which is the Research Institute for Future Crypto Economics in Vienna. I think some people are there from RIAT at DogeCon. I'm not seeing you anywhere in the audience, but yeah. So what else to say in this kind of opening moment? I guess the limitations of the the limitations of something like the Satoshi Oath, the limitations, the difficulties of thinking through an ethics and a politics of blockchain is really that, we're dealing with technologies and we're dealing with contexts that are not only down to the individual developer in a specific moment in time. There's other things that kind of play into what is or is not possible to do as a developer. And some of those things are the kind of cultures and desires of society more broadly in a given moment in time. And that's where I think like cultural work more generally is very important. And also the kinds of stories that we tell ourselves and tell other people about what is possible, what progress looks like, the things that we consider to be bad or the things that we consider to be good. And of course, like other structuring elements like law, policy, and the market. But I'm very excited for DogeCon, and I wish I could be there with you guys because I think there is so much of the kind of prehistory to blockchain or like the kind of culture of the prehistory to blockchain that has been kind of forgotten in the past few years. In the industry, especially I'm thinking about like its roots in peer-to-peer open source and hacker culture and the kind of ethics that were developed within those cultures and the politics that were developed within those cultures that somehow are being lost and somehow are being kind of sidelined, and instead what you've got is, these concepts like decentralization are still being thrown around, but they've kind of done this strange evolution of becoming both dogmas in the sense that we want to decentralize everything, but also become extremely underdefined, meaning, we have this kind of dangerous combination of a situation where the concepts can kind of cover for hidden power structures, but at the same time permit a lot of false claims because, applications, we're decentralized. While in actual fact, the kinds of effects that are taking place are not at all looking that way. So, this was part of the reason why I wrote the Satoshi Oath. This is part of the reason why I think DogeCon is so important as an event, is to really kind of bring out some of that prehistory in, a kind of strong hacker ethic, a strong kind of politics that came with that, and to bring those things forward in a way that opens up for experimentation and playfulness, and it doesn't get both kind of dogmatic and creating new kind of hidden power structures in the way that the industry is at the moment. So, and I think the production of culture is extremely important for that. That was another one of the reasons for why we wrote the Satoshi Oath, was as a kind of initiation into what we wanted to create as a kind of cultural environment where developers consider these questions and create alliances with people in a kind of interdisciplinary way. And so, yeah, the cultural aspect is very important, and that's one strategy. And the other strategy that I'm working at UCL with is more on the kind of scientific and technical line of really kind of nailing down a interdisciplinary vocabulary around these concepts. Like, what do they mean across disciplines? How can they be applied in a rigorous way across disciplines? And how can that then be adopted in the production of new kinds of protocols? Yeah, I think I'll leave it at that. That's kind of a little bit of roundabout, kind of broad context for the oath, some of the reasons why I think it's an important thing, and some of the reasons why I wish I was in Vancouver with everyone today.
All right, thank you so much, China, for beaming in. If you are a developer and you have not read Satoshi's Oath for Developers, it is a required reading for when you build a project. You really need to be thinking about why you're building and how. And as Chelsea mentioned, this is one of her big inspirations ethically. So even if you're not a developer, you should really read it. It's not too long. It's very digestible, and it'll give you really good perspective. So we'd like to thank China so much for being here today. And we will talk to you soon. There is a live stream going to be up of the panel, so if you're up a little bit longer, then you can. Okay, I'm going to get this switched around here.
I can tell from the screen I've got a bit too much sun here.
Yeah, we're just getting our first round of that.
Oh yeah.
All right, thank you so much.
Nice one. Bye, guys.
Okay, thank you. Bye. I think we got a magical button over here. It says up. High-tech stuff. Hello? I'll let it dramatically rise first. And for the future, we're going to go to the back doors. We should really like it. All right, everybody. It is my absolute honor to welcome you to DogeCon Vancouver. We had an amazing ceremony last night. The opening ceremony was a great turnout, a lot of fun, and met a lot of great people from out of town who just made it in for that very beginning. We welcome everybody. We've been planning this for a few months now, and it has been it's been a lot of work, and it's already paid off in dividends after seeing everything last night and starting out here today. We do want to give a huge thanks to our title sponsors, which is Presearch right here. Yeah, Presearch. Ubic Technologies. Alex Sturck just stepped out of the room, but if we cheer, maybe he'll hear. Yay! And then, of course, Right Mesh. They're local to us. Yeah, they even got Doge Mesh shirts made for this. Yeah, I'd also like to thank specifically the team. Chelsea, myself, Tana, and Armand. We were really the core team through all this, but there was others really involved. A special shout out to the people who just couldn't make it from our community. There's a couple, Andrew Wagner and Rob Myers. They're big inspirations or helps. Rob helped with a lot of this before he went away for a week, and Andrew's Coin Fest has been a big inspiration to us. So we would like to make sure they know we're thinking about them. So throughout the day, this is the Crypto Economics Summit. Throughout the day, we're going to be, this will be a little more standard conference. We're going to explore some ideas on our panels that a lot of places don't tackle these days in the conference scene. We're going to discuss the topics of what is value, anti-fragility, consensus, and abundance. So these are more core meta concepts. We'd like to use today's opportunity. We've got a great lineup of speakers and panelists for today. There's going to be some workshops going on in the other room. Our friend Matt, who's in here somewhere, yeah, he's going to be doing one. And the CryptoKitties team from Axiom Zen is going to be doing another one. So we really appreciate them coming through on that. I know Matt's really good in the local community. He's been doing a lot of education for a long time now, a lot of outreach. So, you don't want to miss that. That will be going on simultaneously, so you can be popping back and forth. we're going to try and get you to use the back doors here if you do go, just because the foot traffic. As for the rest of the events tomorrow, we will be doing Doge Quest. We will be doing a puppy parade to start up from, where does the puppy parade start? The puppy parade starts very close to here. You can find the direction on Hoover. At the church right by D-Control, it's about 3 blocks away. From the puppy parade, we will be leading our way down to the Chinese Cultural Center because it is the year of the Doge. And they were gracious enough to say we said we were putting on a little conference, and they had a very fitting place, and they were very happy to let us use their front space. From there, we will be launching the Doge Quest, the hunt for the one true chain, which you're all not required, but encouraged to enter. If you give your name to the Blockstream table and how you rate yourself in tech literacy between 1 to 5. So we can make sure we don't end up with too many 5s on a team. And if we get some 1s, people who just want to participate, we want to make sure everyone's involved. Doge Quest will take a couple hours. It's an immersive story set in a dystopian, cyberpunk, Dogecoin maximalist future. And that's the best description we got right now. It'll be kind of like a scavenger hunt / decentralized escape room. So it will be quite the adventure. We'll have you running around town, and we'll have you in a really good immersive story. Really bring out the feel of the Doge. From there, the next event, we'll be taking a little break in the afternoon. During Doge Quest, there will be some stuff at one of our great sponsors, 7 Gate Ventures, a local company or local capital firm, who's been nice enough to sponsor and let us use their space. So we're going to be doing some stuff out of their space during Doge Quest for people that aren't really up for the I'm going to charge around the city kind of attitude. From there, I think it's up to people to get dinner on their own. We will reconvene for the State of the Decentralized Union at the WASC Center. And we really want to make sure everyone can get in there. It's arranged seating and then some standing room. The arranged seating will be going to our upgraded people who bought upgraded tickets and people who sponsored and the core team members. So we should have some extra. There's definitely going to be room for everyone, I think, and that's going to be a very, very interesting experience. Gary LaChance from the Decentralized Dance Party will be in charge of that, and there will be many speakers with 5-minute slots. Is my current understanding of it. But Gary is going to work his magic, so we'll see how it ends up. But the plan is for a lot of people to give short talks on different aspects of, the union as a country, the world, and decentralization and how it affects each of those aspects of our society. Following that, we will be headed up to the art gallery at 9 o'clock for a decentralized dance party. If you have not participated in one of those before, you need to at least be there for the beginning. It has a chance to run late. The short of it is someone has a radio transmitter in their backpack, and boom boxes will be handing out, and the party will follow wherever the party decides to go. Just follow the music. It'll be very easy to find us. And then Sunday will be all day in a single venue at the Waldorf Hotel. The directions to that are on the Hoover. And we'll be doing our meme art rap show. We'll be talking about culture, and we'll be having some art displays and brief panels on that one too. And a lot of really end out the weekend with some together time, a lot more being able to, a mixer at the end instead of the beginning, because we're DogeCon. We can get away with a lot. We really threw this together in a long time, but it really came together in the end very magically. And anything that goes wrong, we're just kind of like, we're DogeCon, it's okay. We're all here because we want to be here, and because we're all in to learn and have a good time. Yeah, and I'd like to special extra thank you to Chelsea for being the. I did say it was a team of 4, but like it or not, she is the leader. It falls naturally.
It's funny, I ran through the room frantically thinking that 2 of our panelists were missing, but all of our panelists are sitting in the room right now. So I think we're good.
And we're going to be moving right into the panel.
Yeah, I believe so. And
awesome.
You are our moderator.
And I was moderating the first panel. Yeah.
So if Colin, Brooklyn, take it, and who else? Oh, my brain.
John.
Yeah.
John, thank you, John. I don't understand.
Oh, that's We all get our own fancy
These are
microphones.
live, but if you all want to do a nice mic test.
Yeah. Just pull up your chair to the microphone. There's 5. What the,
Yeah, I think you can sit too.
yeah, I'll have to let me get on the edge.
Check.
Hello.
You can get his mic checks down the line.
Test check.
Check 1, 2.
Hello. Oh shit. Domain one. Hello. You want? Hello. Doge Mesh.
Secret project, guys. We can't reveal anything else.
No.
Let me orient myself quickly.
Start at the top.
Start at the top. I thought. All right. So I'd like to introduce our panelists. Hopefully they sat down in the same order they were written down in. I believe that was correct. We have John Lives here. I said that correctly?
No.
No, I didn't. he nodded. I have a very hard I have Sawkill with an extra L, so everyone gets my name wrong too.
Yeah.
So I'm sure you. Yeah. And how do you say that?
Leo TA.
John Leotier. Oh, so you got an extra R in there for pronunciation. All right, and he's the CEO and director at RightMesh AG.
Yep.
At
A
RightMesh.
Swiss company, not a BC company. Just for in case anybody's from BCSC is listening, we are not a BC company.
RightMesh AG. Always confirm the end. And he's also the chief marketing officer for their parent company, Left.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, you have a company named Left as well.
We are left. We do things right.
Oh, and that's why that's the attitude of why we want to have an event like this. And they definitely have if people don't know what they do, they have a very strong vision of decentralization and helping out the third world get connected to each other. And they're very good with supporting community events like this one or even smaller ones at all scales. And we are so happy to have them here. So that's John. We have Brooklyn. We were going to skip a spot so I can go in my order. Brooklyn Zelinka.
Zelenka.
Zelika. 0 to 2. She is a founding party of Robot Overlord Software.
Sounds awesome.
Yeah. She is a polyglot programmer who has long invigorated the tech meetup scene of Vancouver. Thank you so much for doing that. And then we have Colin. Colin Pape.
1 for 3.
1 for 3. Here we go. He is the project lead at Presearch. And he's pushing for a transparent, open, and decentralized search engine focused on the users. And I've been trying to make this stick for a while. Presearch it.
Presearch it.
Yeah, it can replace Google it. We
That'd be
finally have
amazing.
something good enough.
Yes.
Yeah, Bing it just doesn't really work. DuckDuckGo it, like none of those. It doesn't roll off the tongue, but Presearch it does. So
Good
yeah,
work.
yeah.
Awesome.
Focus that in on your. Yeah, I want that to be your slogan. I've been actually pitching that for a few months now.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. Okay.
Yeah, since one of the last conferences. And then of course we have Taylor Gearing, who is one of the founding members and chairman of the Blockchain Institute. He was involved with laying down the technical groundwork for Bitcoin and Ethereum, and he helped establish the Ethereum Foundation. And I know Bob showed a picture yesterday of all the one of the first meetups of the people that wanted to go into the Ethereum Foundation, and you were right in there. So thank you so much. So today's talk is going to be on value, or this one is on value. What is value? How do we define value? And how has our definition of value changed since we moved into the state of cryptocurrency, where we have a more free market mathematical definition of like value kind of finds itself in a way that has much less human involvement. So if we could just get a few minutes from each of you, why don't we start with John beside me on the.
I can just riff if you
You
can't
can
make it
riff it,
ready.
yeah, and that's not my race, Chelsea. It's way nicer than mine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have the same
And
problem.
how do you define value, and how does it affect what you guys are doing at RightMesh?
So I think sound check. You guys can hear me okay if I'm not leaning forward like that. Okay. So value from our perspective sort of goes back into generations and generations and really millennia ago, where you start looking at the concept of what is money, what is value, and that's sort of part of the conversation. But value for us is often synonymous with work. And if you look at value being created or work being done, they are kind of interchangeable. So people always assume that when the robot overlords finally took over, the work that would be being done would be Rosie from the Jetsons coming to do your housework and do various things like that. That is work, it is value. But if you also then paid somebody to do work on your behalf, value is being created. I think we're living in a world right now where work is being done by robots all around us. Those robots just arrived in the shape of Bitcoin mining rigs, nice cube-shaped robots that are capable of doing value or producing value on behalf of their owners. Our belief and our contention is that a smartphone is also a robot. A smartphone is capable of producing value on behalf of its owner, whether that value is in the shape and context of I can sell you my connectivity because I'm not using it. I have sensor information that is my sensor information, and I will let somebody have access to that in exchange for the for payment of some capacity. Various types of value that get created on the device by the user, wherever they happen to be, belongs to that user. And one of the nice things about this new world we're living in is that the value that gets created halfway around the world is worth the same as the value here. If you mine some Bitcoin in China, it's the exact same value as Bitcoin being mined in Canada. If you look at it from a perspective of the value gets produced on a device, value of $1 a day, can you produce $1 a day of value? You know what, for us over here, that's not bad. But in an emerging market, $1 a day is life-changing. If you can produce $1 a day of value in Bangladesh, where we have a large team, that's universal basic income. And that's new value being created, not old value. So for us, value in work, they're kind of synonymous, and it's a chance to change lives all around the world.
Awesome. Colin, so since you guys are working on adding value to user data and how we value that, how do you guys see value in what you do?
Yeah, I think it's a really exciting time, just in general, cryptocurrency, unlocking and kind of capturing some of the old value that has been the value that has kind of permeated and controlled the world, and just seeing how some of that value is being transferred and funneled into events like this, and people who have different views on the future, I think is what's really exciting. We view value, as John said, work is obviously a great way to think of it, but it also, I think, goes to connections, relationships. It goes to introductions. It goes to the data that people produce, the way that it's curated, and what we're really trying to do at the core with Presearch is go from kind of this model of consumers, which is really kind of what some of the existing search engines and a lot of the online platforms are kind of forcing us to be, to one more about rewarding everybody as producers and kind of trying to give some leverage to the producer and ensure that there's more of a level playing field, so that those, for instance, who are in the Google ecosystem, let's say, they create value, they actually create the content, they have generated most of the value, but that value is then more or less extracted through the Google auction system, which brings them about $100 billion a year, doesn't really get distributed to the participants within the network. We see it as being something that's more equitable and with a token-based model to be able to reward those who are contributing on all different levels. So it's, there's an opportunity to monetize your personal data. Sure, that's kind of one part of it, but I think largely it's more about creating just this level playing field where people who are creating value are recognized and rewarded.
All right. So as we have a panel side, if any of you guys ever want to jump in and add comments to what someone says, yeah, that's why we like to do this style. I find sometimes the conferences are a lot of single people talking. So yeah, feel free to jump in if someone says something you disagree with or agree with. Yeah, this one's for Brooklyn as we move down the line. So what are the limits of how we can code value with things like smart contracts? How do we bring the value into the system? And what are the limits of how much value can be there, and how much do we control the value we put in versus how much does it control itself and grow?
Yeah, absolutely. So the actual limits on a system, you can, with tech and programming, you can pretty much model things however you feel like, right? So the economic questions are broader than just the technology. Really, the limits end up being more around transfer of value, and particularly speed. We're already bumping up into physical limits, right? Speed of light only goes so fast, especially in fiber optics. How much of it can be stored, how much of it can be transferred around is mostly limited by transfer of value. From a programmer's perspective, value is about two things. Even though value as a word has many different senses, which we've already heard a few different versions of. The interesting ones for me or for programmers generally are about scarcity and control or ownership. How do you handle ownership in any system, and especially a decentralized one? The point of programming really is to systemize things in such a way that they're reproducible infinitely, right? So how do you limit the reproducibility in a way that makes sense, right? If we fork a chain, suddenly you have twice as much money on separate chains, things like that. So a lot of it ends up being social systems and building in to a system how those social systems can interact. So it's less of a technological problem, more of a building the right systems into it for people. Because at the end of the day, people control and create these things, just as the keynote mentioned.
Awesome, thank you so much. And so Taylor, just to maybe switch it up on you just a little bit.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you were part of the early Ethereum Foundation, and something that must be true is you guys had a set of shared values amongst yourselves. So how does coming together? Did you guys all have the same set of values going in, or would you think there was a diversity of values when you went into that? I just switched the terminology there.
Yeah. I'm sure there was a set of shared values. Like we all came from a crypto. Well, I don't know all, but many of us came from kind of a crypto economic Bitcoin interest, right? So we had those shared values, of course. Certainly we had a divergence of values in certain areas, as we heard from Bob last night, and trying to bridge those gaps. One thing I think about, though, if I can change the question completely, is non-economic value, right? We were kind of talking about value earlier, and just the repeated message in my head was like, what's the value of a hug, right? There's not necessarily work or anything that's put into it, although I guess. Can you, I'm sure you can. People have free hug signs, though, so I don't know. The bottom on the market might be. Yeah. But like think about value in different senses. And I also think about the Citizens United ruling in the United States, where they said that like speech is money or money is speech and so forth, right? And now we're in a system where we can literally tokenize kind of anything theoretically, giving a value, a monetary number to something. So yeah, I don't have anything concrete to say on that. I just think they're fun ideas to think about. And I kind of wonder where we're going with this whole crazy project if it turns out that a lot of the United States was upset with the Citizens United ruling, and actually it feels like the more further down we go this path, I think that actually maybe the Supreme Court probably wasn't wrong in that ruling, which even though I disagree with, I have to acknowledge that. So yeah, value, it's a funny thing.
Yeah. Why don't I just open this one up to everybody? How do you guys see our definition of value changing since cryptocurrency? And how do you see the definition of value changing not just among our people who have, we've been into this, we learned about it, we love it. How has our progress forward changed the definition of value in the overall economic ecosystem?
I'll add a little something to that, and if someone else wants to kind of jump on that. So I come from a very technological programmer, autism spectrum kind of background, right? So I kind of was really keen on this idea of Bitcoin and independence and all this kind of stuff. But as I've spent more time in the space and grown up a little bit emotionally, I've realized that there's other benefits to life, other values in life besides monetary seeking values, right? So I think for me, I've seen that, and I've kind of put the question out to people is how much of blockchain is a philosophical way of working and not necessarily a technological tool. And something that I also kind of think about is maybe this is kind of the starting point of a discussion we all needed comes at a right time with many other things, but to actually start going about things in a different way where we do change the things we value, considering we live in a capitalistic system, and there will always be this tendency towards lumping capital together, which creates more value. We can't avoid that. So like, what can we do to like maybe slightly bend the tangent towards human ideals?
I'll add to that. One of the thoughts that I've been sort of percolating around in the head and don't quite have a full clear concept is an idea we practice over at Left, parent company of Right, we do things right, called sustainable commerce. And sustainable commerce, yes, it has environmental aspects to it, but people understand it's sustainable to do that. But for us, it's more about balance. You put something in, you get something out. And one of the things to go and answer your question as far as how does the whole crypto economy and tokenization sort of deal with that, you can put something in now and may never see a result or payback of that for generations down the road. So from a simple standpoint, I spend $1 as a capitalist, I make $1.10, hey, I'm profitable. I hire a developer today, and that developer builds a new product and service I bring to market in 2 years from now. I have either a net balance in the equation. You start looking at some of the longer term things. How do you monetize a hub? You establish a relationship attached to that concept. You exchange value of a relationship, and that value doesn't necessarily have to pay back and you make money from that, but you have a longer term better society from that, and you are happier later on. There's a
more hugs.
More hugs.
Yes.
It's you smile at somebody, they smile back, and from that comes into that balanced nature of sustainability in an ecosystem, and we are all one giant ecosystem. So it's kind of how balance, and you can actually tokenize that in a way if you want to look at it from that perspective. Random thought.
Yeah, I think kind of where we're to some degree going is away from money per se, and almost more towards like goodwill, because goodwill is often what enables you to actually accomplish things. And hugs certainly play into goodwill. Good experiences play into goodwill. Connections, introductions, all those different things kind of support goodwill. And really, I think we're hopefully shifting away from this society where everybody's driven by, the monetary benefit. And don't get me wrong, straight up economics are still important. This room is very physical. There are certainly things that people are never going to do just out of goodwill, things that have significant material costs to produce. But I think as a lot of the infrastructure that we rely on has been built, and we're kind of now, we have this really solid foundation, and a lot of, the change and the interests and, the meaning for people comes more from a social nature as opposed to just a straight up material nature. I think that goodwill is becoming much more important, and it's really exciting to be able to leverage, cryptocurrencies that, you can kind of spin up from nothing and have a way of within a network kind of, shift goodwill around and help to empower different groups at scale. So that's what I'm super excited about. And I see it within all these people, all of you who are kind of within this movement, coming together, having, shared kind of vision for the future, and just to see what is happening by us being able to leverage cryptocurrencies and to some degree leverage the interests of the people who are just excited about money to kind of, convey that old school value onto cryptocurrencies to be able to empower us all. So,
yeah, and to kind of riff on that a bit, a large part of the reason why people get interested in blockchain technology, et cetera, is the economic, aspect of it right now. You can trade tokens. Everybody wants token trading tips.
Speculation,
yeah.
No.
Yeah. And, we've heard a lot, on this question about values, right? Almost like the meta ethics of what should you care about? What sort of action should you take? And based on how a decentralized system works, what should you care about? And thinking about these, very, very high level questions, which is great, but it's also, it's interesting that we've gone from this, highly materialistic, we can make a lot of money really quick, into, sort of a communal, open source values, right? Decentralization isn't new. right? Even in tech, it's existed for decades. There's 60 years of history here, right? Open source hacker ethic isn't new, right? But because of the way the system works and the interests of the people in the community, we're being able to spread these ideas. So again, to split the idea from value versus values, this evolution's happening because of because people are getting exposed to these ideas, which I think is very interesting.
In some ways, and I don't want to jump ahead too far because there's a panel called Abundance later, I think. So I'm kind of the opinion in some of my discussions that we've kind of entered this post-scarcity society, maybe not wholly across the world, but certainly in Western societies, first world nations. And if that's true, maybe this kind of mentality of scarcity is not the right mentality we have. And if we instead adopt a mentality of abundance, it shifts what we value, right? Like less economic value and more societal values, or this meta idea of values. Yeah, again, nothing concrete, just a fun thought.
Yeah, and speaking to that though, in a post-scarcity society, which a lot of us feel like we're headed towards, like things like renewable energy are just coming along. We're having these globally centralized opt-in systems. How do we see? How do any of you guys see the society's view of value evolving in a post-scarcity economy?
So to again, to break down the term a little bit, you can never get rid of scarcity entirely. There's always some level of it: ownership, social scarcity. If you have a title, right, and time. Right. Time's the big one. Yep. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So scarcity is never going away, but the can you feed yourself scarcity is solvable, at least solvable at this point in the West, at least. So.
I think one of the changes we're seeing is going back into value and scarcity and how the evolution of value. I think for millennia we've always basically been creating value by compensating the middleman. Everybody talks about. This whole decentralized movement is death to the middleman, or whatever it is. I don't think it's death to the middleman. I think it's more change of how that middleman is going to be compensated. They're being compensated now in a new decentralized world about introducing efficiency as opposed to extracting efficiency. Before, you have two sides of the equation, and the middlemen that make the most are those that take advantage of that greatest discrepancy of market inefficiencies. But if you look at where the evolution is going now, those who introduce efficiencies and thereby creating new value in the ecosystem, they benefit from that new value being created. And there's a sort of fundamental shift from rewarding the market inefficiencies to rewarding value creation. And so from all of us that are benefiting in the crypto space, we're benefiting from new value being created. You have a person who sits down in the slums of Brazil or wherever they happen to be, and they come up with original thought, and that original thought is shared and digitized in a format that can be transmitted across geopolitical boundaries at the speed of light or near speed of light. That is original thought. That is now value being created out of thin air. And that's the new stuff that's being created. That's the new efficiencies in the system that didn't exist before and couldn't exist before.
Is there an overlay between the values and values meta breakdown idea and Maslow's hierarchy, do you think? Or is there some sort of relationship? Because I'm thinking about moving higher up the Maslow's hierarchy of needs into self-actualization, and then you're not worried about shelter and food and so forth. You're worried about, like, does this thing make me happy or not when I look at it, right? And I think that there's a lot of value creation in that aspect, like preferential value, not necessarily feeding yourselves. So I wonder if, like, the fact that we as a society have kind of moved up Maslow's hierarchy allows these kind of like Cambrian explosion of ideas and value creation.
It's we looked at that a lot because we're large part of the population that we're dealing with are the new consuming class, the brand new, who went from that very base level of the pyramid up to very first time consumption. And we had a great conversation with Andreas Antonopoulos, who's a wonderful man and a great thinker. And I sort of expressed my concern to him is that we're about to bring 100 million people into crypto, yet I have no idea how to get them out of crypto and back into fiat. And he says, why the hell would you want to do that? Yeah. And it's a fundamental question. I said, well, because you bring them into crypto and then they earn tokens in an economy and need to go out and buy things. And you say, well, what does that consumer who entered consumption class for the very first time want to buy? So, well, they want to buy education. Well, that's digital. They want to buy entertainment. That's digital. They want to buy information. Well, that's digital. Most things that you want to buy in that very first level, that consumptive class, they're now all digitized. 20 years ago, they weren't. And you start looking at what's going to change in society as you go forward to the next leap forward with whether it's virtual reality or presence or all those types of things. Life itself is becoming digitized. And digitized is now just exchange of value. That was one of that big aha for me, is that life didn't have to be consumptive in that way. It's just consumptive of digital. You have a question there for you.
I definitely agree with a good amount of your point. I think I'm more kind of curious about, like, with all this advancement and wealth that's going to be coming out, right? There's going to be massive wealth. It's not even a wealth transfer. It's really like a wealth freeing of wealth, right? Because right now all the wealth is being siloed in, these different individual pockets, essentially. And once this whole evolution starts really happening and becoming more mainstream, they will have no choice but to open up those silo banks. And one thing I think that we should not forget is that our challenge will probably go towards how we can keep our humanity and stay more grounded as we kind of elevate ourselves as a global society, right? And Andreas makes a very, very good point that the smartest thing that Satoshi did was to learn how to disappear, right? And we should never forget that first lesson. And coming back to the digitizing of everything, there's a good thing. Canada is a cash society for the most part. I spent a good amount of my day yesterday roaming around the city, and people were happy for a traveler to spend their own cash, right? Like their money. It means that you want to do as the Romans do in Rome.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, I love that thought, and I think that what this token economy or the tokenized future, potentially, however you want to think of it, creates is really the ability for people to funnel their support and their value to those who they feel aligned with more openly, more freely, without those middle people who are extracting wealth and siloing wealth and controlling wealth. And that, to me, is what's extremely exciting.
I would almost ask, and perhaps even to the other panelists, as we move up this Maslow's hierarchy, and solve scarcity and even communal scarcity, as people have more free time to work on projects that they care about, this sort of almost Star Trek future, right? Should everything be tokenized? Again, with this hacker ethic, right?
I think not, but keep going.
So like open source, hacker ethic, shouldn't you be investing your time and energy into projects that you care about? Do you need to have an economic payoff at the end of that? Are we currently in sort of a transition period of right now you need to vote with your tokens to funnel support towards something, but do we need that in the long run, right? Obviously we do right now, right? But will we?
Yeah, I think, sorry, if you don't mind, one of the things that actually worries me a lot is actually us thinking that we've moved up the hierarchy, because we're more centralized than we have ever been from the standpoint of providing those fundamental needs, factory farming, mass transportation, things being shipped from all over the world. My background is more in local economies, and what I would really love to see this movement do is take that first or second surge of wealth and actually create a truly decentralized society where we actually have local resilience. We do have the ability to opt out of these big top level systems rather than rest on our laurels that we are so far up that now but we're actually more dependent than we've ever been. That scares me a lot.
need to is it's just like creating tools. So the biggest thing that we're seeing right now is that there's an explosion of people moving towards cities, and that there's in the world, even if we just talk about first world countries, Canada, United States, UK, we have all of these places that are kind of in this post-industrializing or post-manufacturing period, and all these cities and towns and smaller places that did well because of the boom in something, and that now because there's been movement because wait, we can do this cheaper somewhere else, or we don't even need to do this that way anymore. And it's kind of like, well, maybe you guys should all just move towards where the action is, and the understanding that people don't all want to leave their towns. People don't all want to live in the city as great as city people think the city is. And so what I really hope is that we're creating tools so that people all over the world can create things that make sense for their communities and it's not like, we have an idea, let's go and tell you. It's like now we create the tools, and the people who know best about what's going to work in a country or a city or a community are the people who are within it. Also, they're the ones who have the most what's the word? Where it's like the most meaningful to them, of course, because it's their friends and their community, and they're going to be the most invested. So the best ideas for places are going to come out of the people from there. So reason I got involved in blockchain is because I think maybe there's ability that we create these tools and all of these things that we're talking about. We need to can't have all this one place growing bananas and nobody else. We're not eating fresh food anymore, and someone can only do one thing of a widget, and nobody can create anything. Of course, we have to get back to where we're all being able to create value. That's not just one little thing that if a big company decides it's cheaper somewhere else, we devastate a town. It's ridiculous. So I think that's, to me, what blockchain has the potential to do, and that's why it's so special. And of course, when you see things and it's not going quite as fast in that direction, it's when is the world saving going to start? But I hope that everyone who's realizes how important this could be. That's personally what I feel can be this major impact on the world.
Go ahead.
I was just want to touch on a couple of points that were kind of brought up. So I think we all, as individuals, create lots of our own data. We're becoming more and more aware of that. We don't really like when that data is put in our face without us being aware of it. Also, to the point of should we create tokens for everything? I think no is the answer. Even though we should consider what are appropriate uses of this, and then you start to think of appropriateness, right? I think that capitalism, by and large, it works for the incentive portion, it works to produce the sort of let's go do stuff and create things. It works for the most part. There's certain areas where it doesn't really work really well. Privatizing prison systems produces a bad outcome for society. I'm not saying blockchain will fix that, but in that area I can say, wait a minute, this capitalism thing I was sold maybe isn't doing exactly what I want. Can I produce a different set of outcomes, different sets of incentives using these tokens? Now, whether that's done, at a national level, no. Or at a local level, I think is probably a more appropriate answer, but it gives the ability for people to kind of self-organize, hopefully. And I think this is part of the let's all work together, communal aspect, and maybe find solutions to those problems, either whether they be from a lower level person or somebody who's been at the top and has an idea, but their hands have been tied by regulation, whatever it may be. It is a different tool, different set of things that we can use to apply in certain situations. And we're finding out now more and more what those situations could be. Maybe one of those things, I'm a very passionate supporter of taking back control of your data. Maybe this is a way for us as a collective internet users to kind of unionize, collectively bargain for our own data to be valued as it should. And hey, if you're going to sell it, at least give me a cut of that revenue, please.
Well,
Yeah.
you said there's
Plug for research.
I didn't feel the need to say much else. Totally. Yeah. Exactly.
Interesting from a global globalization perspective. We mentioned that we have a team in Bangladesh. The first time I went there, we actually are in a smaller town of only about 2 million people, so it's a really small town. called Khulna. We also have an office in Dhaka. Dhaka right now has about 18 million people, adding over 1 million people per year. When we're out at Consensus in New York, they had the New York Economic Development Office talking about the growth in New York, and here's the city, and we'll add 600,000 people by the year 2040, or something like that. Don't quote me on the number, but it was some small amount that you look at the numbers and realize Dhaka is adding that every 6 months. But in a place like that, you're now dealing with, from, say, us, we went there, we went to Bangladesh because it was cheap back in 2010. We stayed because we fell in love with the country and the people, and we realized we could make a real lasting difference. We went there because it was cheap. Is that a bad thing? We're no longer dealing with this local, national, we're dealing with this global world in which value can move at a fraction of a second. Who's here has used Fiverr for any kind of services at all? So Fiverr, for $5, you can get a person to pretty much anything, create a logo, create a graphic, create a little spinning man holding a sign.
A white paper.
A white paper? Not ours, but yeah, it's crazy. But most of the value people who are contributing things on Fiverr, I would not go write a white paper for $5. I wouldn't create a logo for $5. But somebody who's operating in Bangladesh or Brazil or in parts of Africa who now have access to technology to reach those global audiences can create a logo for $5. That value that goes from those who have to those who have not are dramatically changing and transforming those lives. The communities that we're living in is not a community of a local, it's a community of those shared values that you have. And that might be an economic value or economic relationship, or it might be something that, hey, I like people who like dogs. I'm a cat person. I saw an awesome cat shirt, by the way. That's great, cool. But you may have those community where you have those shared values, and those may be economic values, or they may be tied onto the political and various things. And I do believe that what we are going to see eventually is the falling of the nation state, for example, or the municipal or the city. And that's why my MP called me an anarchist, but that's a whole other conversation.
Mark.
Ultimately, all these things are still, unfortunately, dependent on pre-existing systems.
Mm-hmm.
And the true potential of this technology will forever be impeded so long as you have to operate within those systems.
Mm-hmm.
So what mechanisms do you guys see as being the most effective means to, incentivize the restructuring of those systems in a way that they truly allow distributed governance?
I feel like the most effective tool used by existing governments has been weaponry. I don't necessarily advocate for that. Yeah, using our Doge memes to convince the masses.
I disagree. I think it's been information.
Yeah, information campaign.
Information more so than weaponry. The only reason you need weaponry is the information is already won. So
Okay.
if you can actually, and right now you look at what's happening around the world with the information warfare between nation states or even on a local level, is what can you control that information? When the general public has access to connectivity, they have access to information. Bree's been talking to groups about distributing Wikipedia across the mesh. That puts information that's communally sourced and community generated into the hands of the public. That is transformative, and hopefully will start changing things over time. An old English teacher I had says, first you have to know the rules in order to break the rules. You can have a one sentence or one word sentence, stop. It breaks all the rules of the English language. However, that is an official sentence. So once you start working within the system to actually know the rules and how the rules are played, you can transform out of the system.
There's a literacy issue there where we intentionally were not told or taught how to understand those systems and systems like it. And as a result, people kind of willingly accept the ignorance as normal, right? So this is an opportunity for people to become literate in these new financial models. And what are we doing about that? Like, could that not be the mechanism by which people can take back the power?
So I think this one in particular is very tricky because it involves so much power and existing deeply entrenched power systems. If you look at the previous federal election, Trudeau ran on a campaign that involved voting reform, and that never happened, right? Because why would you if the existing system benefited you? The only way that we can change these systems, political systems, really, fundamentally, is with enough pressure over a long enough time, which means making people care about these things. We've had, referendums in BC to change voting, and it never passes, right? It's about literacy, education, and again, maybe one of the strengths of what we're seeing in blockchain and the interest is this inheriting of the values of the community to a broader population.
Yeah, I think what's really powerful is proof of concept and inspiration to provide people with the belief that they can create change on their own. And I mean, when I think of the centralized systems, I think of energy, I think of, food, water, all the real basic stuff. I mean, mesh internet, that's a huge potential tool for society to create a truly resilient and decentralized society. But I think what is really interesting and what I would love to see and what we're kind of working on behind the scenes a little bit is kind of the concept of an intentional community, more of a community that basically uses the concept of import replacement to basically look at what we're importing into the ecosystem and then just to replace some of those centralized dependencies with less centralized alternatives. And I think that if you can get to a point where you've replaced most of those things, and you can create a model for how other communities can do it, and then inspire people to go do it, provide them with tools and resources to do it, then you have this potential explosion of all these communities that are aligned, that are resilient, that are less centralized than the ones that we currently have. And then when people are functioning within those communities, when they truly have power, I mean, knowledge is power, but knowledge is only so valuable when you have no food or when you have no water or whatever else. And there are still those fundamental needs that we all have as humans. And I think that if there's a way to kind of create that environment where we can have those real base needs actually being, independently provided to the members of the community, and then you can start to move up that hierarchy of needs, and then have it in a replicable model where people can then go do the same thing. That's the way to actually decentralize power, because otherwise a lot of the stuff that we're talking about is actually centralizing power. We're centralizing right now, even with blockchain and everything we're doing, the power in the hands of DARPA, who created the internet and the DNS system and all this stuff. I mean, it's actually laughable when you think about it. And so we need to look at those infrastructure pieces that we're depending on, and how do we replace those? And I mean, right mesh is a very interesting potential solution from the knowledge standpoint. But look at all the other ones that we're dependent on that are even more fundamentally necessary. And so, that to me is what's exciting. If there's an influx of ability and capital and resources and, momentum to hopefully see some of these startup society groups be successful and start to create these models that we can leverage.
I'm curious to know your opinion on something, because before I heard you mentioning something about the flow of capital and how much you can pay for labor in a country and how much you can pay for labor here. So my it's a big question I ask myself a lot, which is how can you keep up standards on developed countries when you have flow of capital without borders? Because okay, so you're renting a house in Vancouver, you're paying $2,000, $1,500 per month apartment. You're renting the same kind of apartment or even way bigger in Brazil, where I'm from. You're paying $500. It's the same physically in the physical world. It's the same asset. What makes it attractive is the country that is surrounding you, the amount of capital that is available in that area. But when you start having flow of capital, which will happen, how do you keep areas that are developed and depend on certain levels of existence not to collapse? Like Vancouver, how do you stop the city from collapsing if the rental and housing prices go a third or a tenth down? Because now it's a global market, it's no longer a centralized market. How do you, governments usually use control of capital flows or other mechanisms, but they do not work in a developed country. The way developed countries position themselves, I think, is with immigration and some other policies. Anyways, it's a big topic, it will take a long time, but I would like to know your opinion.
I know this is kind of an asinine question, but what's the problem if real estate drops in a tenth price?
Well, I have no problem with that. I'm just saying that this would pretty much collapse the economy and the way we know the city as it is right now. Because, for example,
It just sounds like you're saying that the real estate value is a confidence game like any other value game.
It is.
It totally is. I mean,
Yeah.
I mean, all value is kind of like what we place upon it, right? So
Yeah, in that world of abundance, eventually everything will be equal, because if capital does flow equally, a price here in Vancouver eventually will be equivalent to the price in if everything else is equal. And that's
jurisdictional issues and all that sort of thing plays into the value, of course.
From a healthcare quality of life, and you may not want to live in northern Canada, but you may want to live in Brazil and deal with the humidity versus the cold. I don't know, the various trade-offs you have from that perspective. I want to go back to, and not sort of skip over your question, but I want to go back to your question. I think it's a very important point. We happened to watch had a talk last week at our company where we played Barack Obama's speech about Fire It Up. I'm not sure if anybody's ever seen that speech, but he basically talks about a woman who in a small little town in South Carolina, basically sitting there yelling, fire it up, and ready to go. And his point from that perspective is that if one voice can change a room, and then one room can change a town, and one town can change a province or a state, and one state can change a nation, one nation can change the world. Or then we eventually sort of go up from that perspective. So how do we change? One voice at a time. It's the people that we have in the room here that have a chance to transform and take every aspect of society forward. What we're actually doubling that up with, though, is we're also living in the world of great accelerations, where things that used to take 100 years, then took 50, then took 10, then took 5. The people talk about crypto time. We can't keep up to crypto time. It's moving too fast. We shouldn't hope to try to keep up with crypto time. The ability for information or commerce or ideas to transform, the rate at which it's changing is going to be a rate that we cannot keep up with. So your voice right now in this room, your blog post, your tweet, as long as it's not trolling tweets, will have a chance to start transforming other people around you, and those voices will go out and change the world.
Okay, I did have one more on Theo. Yeah, you get it.
Okay, I've got a really quick question for John, actually.
Leotier.
Leotier.
Just the way it's spelled if you speak French. I do not speak French.
You were mentioning that Andreas Antonopoulos answered to the question, how do you get your money out of cryptos, the off-ramp? Why would you want to? And
yeah.
I think that might be important in the future, or that might be the correct attitude in the future. But right now, cryptocurrency is a very solid asset class. I've got money, very small amount of money locked up in cryptocurrency right now, which I would love to have as fiat right now. So that's a real problem. And for me to actually risk more money in crypto, and it is a risk that, we see BitConnect and other scams where people are losing their money, and I'm more savvy than other people. So to say that the off-ramp isn't important, I don't mean to disagree with Andreas, but, that's not correct.
Well, if you look at what you would spend money on today, and food, and this goes back to assuming the basics of Maslow's. If your food, shelter, if those are taken care of, what would you spend your money on? Information. We have a stream going on where people can actually consume that in digital good. That it makes, in a way, zero sense to go from digital fiat to digital, because that's basically introducing complexity into the system. If it's digital, keep it digital. And that was a direct answer to our question of what are our consumers and our users of our platform looking to purchase, which is those are the next level up on that hierarchy, which is information, education, entertainment, various elements that are that next level higher of that. Even if you look at self-actualization and that sense of belonging, or eventually that Starbucks Wi-Fi, whatever you're going to deal with. Because apparently Starbucks was the top of the chain, if I remember, in the Maslow's thing. But it's some of those elements. I rarely carry cash. Now, my payments are occurring in digital. It doesn't mean that the current digital system we have for payments are at all adequate for me transacting. But my wife asked to borrow $10 for a school function for my son the other day. I looked at my wallet and I had Singapore dollars, I had US dollars, I had euros, I had Swiss francs, I had some Bangladeshi taka, I had 0 Canadian dollars. I said, well, how about some Bitcoin or some crypto? Like, I have those other things, but I didn't have Canadian dollars. So if you look at where that chain is, it eventually will start trickling over into more digitized economy. And right now, I would assume that you would walk up and you do your Visa to tap or your Interact to tap. That's still digital. It's just there's a middleman in the middle of that conglomerate, and eventually that middleman will no longer have to exist. I don't know if that's.
Well, so just put a hypothesis out there. If there was a really good off ramp for getting money out of cryptocurrency, I think people would risk more of their portfolios into cryptocurrencies than it would increase the adoption.
I think so too.
Can I jump in on real quick on this off ramp idea? Off ramp to what?
Well, there's the cryptocurrency on ramp, which is.
Oh no, I get that. Buying it and getting some. You off ramping into what?
Off ramp is
Stability.
I want to spend my cryptocurrency to buy some.
And you can digitally. So off ramp into what? To buying food. To buying. Just the reason I'm picking on this. Yeah, the reason I'm picking on this is because it sounds like when you say like an on ramp, off ramp, it sounds like an investment vehicle to me, right? And I would argue to say there are utility tokens out there, right? Ethereum's kind of one of those things. And there's also the idea of using, like almost don't want to talk about this because it's factions and all, but store of value versus like transfer mechanism, right? That's another kind of facet of this digital currency stuff. So that's why I'm kind of picking on this off ramp is like, well, if there are kind of multiple uses of this thing, store of value, transaction medium, and an actual utility token for digital services and goods, what is the idea of the off ramp out of? I don't want to use it as a utility token or a medium of exchange or an investment / store of value. I think there are lots of use cases for it, even though people do have to eat. And I understand having to sell something that you exchange something that you have to get something else.
Yeah, it's still, to me, it's those fundamentals that you're trying to figure out how to bridge the gap. I haven't used it really a lot, but bills, BYLLS, use that. You can pay a lot of bills, including taxes.
One of our sponsors, Coin Cards, will sell you gift
cards
cards from many Canadian companies for Bitcoin.
Yeah,
and you can support your eating habit at the local grocery store.
So I think it's up to us as kind of the first wave of cryptocurrency to try to find those and minimize that gap as much as we can while people kind of get up to speed and while there's the adoption and the uptake from some of the lagging groups within society, which currently have a ton of value. I mean, let's without a house, without food, a lot of the other stuff doesn't really matter as much. It really diminishes the value, and we need to figure out. I think one of the biggest opportunities is crypto mortgages. Somebody who will start accepting mortgage payments in cryptocurrency, that is a massive opportunity. That's people's kind of number one base cost. And it's something that, to me, really aligns itself with crypto. Yeah.
One final question to throw back to you. Do you use your Visa when you pay, or do you use actually a depreciating asset like the Canadian dollar?
Well, I'm pretty low tech right now.
Okay.
I use cash.
You use the depreciating asset that's been going down like that over the last century. If you are using
I spend it as quick as I make it.
Okay, so it doesn't matter. So the velocity of money theory is actually carrying through. But if you are using a digital in your Visa tap, you basically pay you 3%, or you don't pay you 3%. The bank or the merchant is paying you 3% for the convenience of you being able to accelerate through the checkout line as fast as you can. For me, with my Visa that I have, and it's being able to have that secure payment. You know what? My card is compromised. Hey, Visa, I need to do a chargeback. No problem. Here you go, sir. Off you go. That's great. I'm already included in the system. You have 2 billion people who are unbanked. They're not included in the system. They can't benefit from that existing financial systems that we have of banking systems of that. Yeah. Getting those people included in the system where they can actually start participating and earning value for the very first time just by walking around and being who they are, that will be where the change starts to transform and tip the other way.
Yeah. Leapfrog.
Okay, we're gonna have to wrap up in a minute. So we got one more because we are at DogeCon. And so I think a lot of us have been around for a while. We've watched the growth of the crypto industry start with Bitcoin and become a few and become many different things. So throughout this last 4 years, we have this one coin called Dogecoin, which really doesn't seem to ever do much on its own, but somehow it retains its value. And without using the word community, why would you say that is? Let's go down the line.
Fun? Is that too obvious of an answer?
I already cut off the word community, so I guess you can go with fun, yeah.
I'll take fun.
How did Dogecoin maintain 4 years later with little development, but it is being developed? Shout out to the Dogecoin devs. It is being developed. How does it still have so much value to be in the top 50 of the thousands of options people have for what token or thing they could buy, with teams behind them, purposes, funding? Yet here we are sitting on the front page. Why Doge?
2 answers, even though one's already been given. Fun. And then literally values. People feel good about what Dogecoin does.
Ooh, doubling back with the value. All right.
Yeah.
You have to use a word that hasn't been used yet.
It's a belief. I wouldn't say religion, but belief.
Last night felt at some points a little bit religious.
See, I was going to say religious, but that's not. Shared delusion.
Oh, we call that reality.
I'll take it.
All right, we got one more answer.
I think that micropayments and the ability to transfer value of tiny amounts is extremely important for the economies that you discuss. In other developing countries, a cup of coffee is so cheap that at some point it will be less than a Satoshi, for example. And in the world of speculation, there are many altcoins that are so cheap that if you trade them for Satoshis, your spread is 100%. Versus if you're trading them for Doge, your spread can be much smaller percents. So I think that we look past that because it's silly or it's whatever, but the reality is that it does have that usefulness to it there. And additionally, I would go so far as to say scarcity, because Dogecoin, despite the fact that it has 10,000 additional Doge per block, if you consider Dogecoin as one coin as a million Doge by moving your decimal place over, 1 mega Doge is one of 110,000 in existence approximately, which is much more scarce than most of the top 30 cryptocurrencies. And so I would argue that its scarcity is one of its strongest assets.
My one-word answer for the record was love.
Yes.
All right, we'd like to thank all of our panelists, Colin, Brooke, John, and Taylor. Oh, I knew I'd miss one. All right, thank you guys so much for being here. Welcome to DogeCon, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for moderating, Alex, and thank you for participating, everyone. If everyone wants to take 5 minutes to grab a coffee, I'm going to gather together the anti-fragility panel and get ourselves set to go. The CryptoKitties team is also in the Seagull rooms doing a hands-on mind mapping workshop. So we've got numerous options, and the live stream, I think, is playing in there as well. So we will reconvene in 5 minutes at 12:38.
Just so everyone knows, CryptoKitties is giving away some sort of accessory, Doge-related accessory. If you have a cat, there's some way to get a Doge accessory for your cat. I don't know it.
This is my first time with the table mic. It's kind of a nice height here. It's very, very good AV setup. Thank you so much to SFU's awesome AV contact, just making it all work for us. And Zach, thank you for handling the live stream. I was watching the other panel from live stream to kind of bug test it. The one thing we realized is that it will be useful for us to have a mic for questions because you can't hear them on the live stream otherwise. So we will have someone with a wireless mic. If you have questions, kind of just raise your hand. I'll indicate them over to you. Because one of the most important things to us, like obviously this is a small, intimate gathering in a small, intimate city. We want this content to be available to everyone. Like the most important part to us is that we are basically creating documentation on these really important philosophical ideas that we need to explore together and form some sort of consensus around. We will discuss what consensus means later this afternoon. But we need to really be actively engaging with these ideas, and we hope to share all this content with the world. We're going to have a media portal. And I've just been so grateful for everyone's participation in this. This panel on the anti-fragile, or organically, the community that likes Nicholas Nassim Taleb's work has started using the word anti-fragility as the noun, even though his book is called The Anti-Fragile. This concept was what drove the foundation of designing DogeTalks for me. I think that all the work that the theorist Nicholas Nassim Taleb does, he did Skin in the Game, Black Swan, etc. He's always kind of looking at, okay, what is the undercurrent of what's going on? What is the unseen? What are things that we don't have words for yet? And the anti-fragile or anti-fragility, we're going to start, since it's a new concept, after I introduce the panelists, we're going to start with a little kind of primer, especially focusing on examples of what are some anti-fragile things. But first I'm going to introduce our panelists. We have to my right here, Max Borders, who is the Executive Director of Social Evolution, co-founded Voice and Exit, former editor at Foundation for Economic Education. And I know Max and invited Max in part because of just great interactions at similarly themed. There's been a string of kind of crypto meeting humanity sorts of conferences, most recently Crypto Psychedelic in Tulum. And this is a little bit of a revisitation of some of the concepts from a panel we did there. So that was one of the reasons I really wanted you on this, was we were really getting at, okay, what is, like, can we pin down anything about transformation as it manifests through human technical innovation? I think a lot of your work is about that. To my left directly is Taylor Singleton Fuchs, one of the core and most reliable members of Decontrol Community Commons. Born and raised in Calgary, he was almost done becoming an accountant in 2013 when he found out about Bitcoin and just completely changed his life and changed his life's path. And when I invited him to be on this panel, he immediately revisited the anti-fragile. And the past week has been a delight for me at our hackerspace because, like, basically DogeCon is 10 times more about the anti-fragile than it was before, because we've been having all these whiteboarded discussions about anti-fragility in the back room. So we're gonna, especially since he revisited this work recently, we're gonna lean on him at the beginning to kind of give us a really good primer on this. And Prav Pillay on the far left here for me, or I guess stage right, is the partner for strategy and business development at, is it Humanitas? Humanitas Capital Management. And Prav started, like, I immediately thought he was a good fit for this because organically his life's work has always been on the fringe of social, global, transformative change. And I just see I mean, we've interacted, especially in terms of like your educational work. He brought our community in to help teach Emily Carr art and design students about blockchain. And just always really kind of pushing the envelope. And like, you started with Doctors Without Borders. It's kind of like you're like revolutionary without borders. So yeah, so to start, can I get a raise of hands of who has heard the concept anti-fragile? Yeah, so reasonable amount. I do want to, you've been given such a good pitch on this. Like, I've learned from you in the past week in your kind of summary of this. So Taylor, if you want to kind of try to give a couple minutes summary of your understanding.
Yeah, of course. So I think to understand what we mean when we say anti-fragile, we should start by clearly defining what we mean when we say something is fragile. So most things in the universe are fragile. and everything that is non-living is fragile. So fragile things exist in their form, but as time passes, as unexpected things happen, those things will eventually destroy it. Fragile things do not like unexpected things. They do not like chaos. And eventually, time destroys everything that is fragile. So you can attempt to make non-living things robust. You can push them to be strong and to last and build buildings that won't fall over. But when we say anti-fragile, we mean something that has past the robustness. It's stronger than simply resisting shocks and being robust to chaos. When we say anti-fragile, we mean something that actually benefits from the unknown and actually becomes more complex through time because it has a system or a way to extract information out of the randomness and to actually become better and to learn. And we can really understand, like our sitting here right now is because we are enmeshed in and have been for 1 billion years in anti-fragile processes. And really the quintessential one is DNA. So DNA divides itself, and when it divides itself, there's an element of randomness and mutation and change that happens when DNA replicates. And all of the diversity of life that we see on Earth can really be brought back to the anti-fragile process of DNA, really absorbing information about the environment and expressing itself in a different way, in a more successful way through time. And I think we can see elements of anti-fragile in our successful systems as well. As our society has become more complex, we process information as actors. And for example, businesses, when they are profitable or not profitable, they are absorbing information and they're giving information about what people like and what people don't like. And as businesses fail, that provides information to the rest. So I really think that there's two key elements of fragile or anti-fragile systems. One key is that they are networks. They are comprised of many individuals, and those individuals are fragile. So we as single expressions of DNA, or we as single businesses, are exposed to death, are exposed to failure. But that failure and that death provides drift in composition of the whole of the network, and allows the network to change and to adapt to information through time. The other element of anti-fragile is the consciousness of the individual. And as an individual who's taking some action, you have a conception of what you want to happen and what you think is going to happen, and you act in a way to get to some goal of some kind. If you are surprised, or if something unexpected happens, you can then, as a conscious individual, process that information into a new action. And by expressing that action, you can portray information to everyone else. And I think those two elements are the elements that have caused the creation of culture and caused the creation of our economic system. And they are the key elements, the key fundamental things that we should try and build systems that take advantage of this pattern that we can notice. So should I keep going?
Well, I think that is actually a good segue to kind of bring it in to the larger discussion. And thank you for the groundwork, because a concept that keeps coming to the forefront with this, with the biology. So from how Taleb framed these things, it is easiest to understand, and in general in life, it's easiest to understand things in terms of concrete biological examples. So I really do think DNA is like kind of the key figure here for understanding the specific nature of what the anti-fragile is getting at. But the concept of evolution goes beyond biology, and I kind of wanted to pitch it to you, Max, with the social evolution concept and the work that you do around, like, kind of looking at, okay, because it's easy to see decentralized, naturally occurring systems which are anti-fragile. My suspicion, and what led me to be so interested in this, is that as soon as we try to design things intentionally, we need to lock things down, maintain infrastructures, and that leads to things being at best robust and at worst fragile. So how can human systems, how can we evolve our communities, our governance, et cetera?
Yeah, there's a lot there to that question. The first thing I think we need to be able to do is going back to this question of networks, is to think in terms of dumb networks rather than planned systems. And dumb networks usually mean that there are lots of choice options with very simple protocol layer, right? Whether that's in the law, the law of the land, or social technology, if you will, social operating systems, or in the technological layer, whatever the system is. So let me pull it back just a moment. And I don't think this is in Taleb anywhere, but there's another thinker. I think it fits very nicely with it and comes from the side and supplementing just what you described, Taylor, at the beginning. How many have ever heard of Adrian Bijan? Anybody? Okay. So Bijan has this theory called the constructal law. And the idea behind the constructal law is, and this goes back to what you presented us in the beginning about it being alive. But the definition of alive, of a living system, is one that to live is to persist in time despite whatever currents are impinging on that system from without. So if a system is unable to deal with the currents of change from without, then it dies. So a living system doesn't necessarily need to be, so a river basin could be considered a living system, even though it's not living and animated in the way we think of being alive. But river basins, tributaries and creeks and so on, vascularize in the way that accommodates for certain kinds of flows in the system, namely rainfall or water. This vascularization at levels of description happens everywhere in nature, happens through our bodies. We see vascular systems in our lungs, in our brains, in our veins and arteries. It happens everywhere in our bodies, happens everywhere in nature. You can look at a map of Vancouver and you can see vascular systems throughout the city. The city in that sense is alive. And this repeating pattern happening at levels of increased complexity, vascularization all the way up. If we map this onto different kinds of human systems, and that's where you were headed with this, is social evolution, we have to be able to deal with the currents of change in however we organize ourselves. And the ways that we organize ourselves usually are legal. So let's just take away the technological for a moment and take the two basic social operating system types for humanity. And I'm not going to bang on and on, I promise. I'm going to button this one up. You have the common law, for example, and you have statute law. So you have these deliberative bodies who want to plan things and figure everything out for everyone in society. And that, generally speaking, is a kind of law in amber approach that tends to be less robust and more fragile, almost always. Rarely you can have some robust statute law, but relatively speaking, it tends to go on the spectrum of fragility because it's in amber. It's special interests accrete around the law, and you have a hard time changing it. Whereas the common law historically has been much more changeable. You have this idea of precedent that can overturn decisions, and circumstances change, and the law evolves more. So you have internal protocols to organizations, for example, holacracy, relative to just top-down management structures. These kind of contrasting systems allow you more anti-fragility or anti-fragile systems versus more fragile systems, generally speaking. So I think that maybe paints a picture by way of examples, But I think the core thing is the ability to reckon with change, reckon with feedback loops that allow you that you can incorporate information and adapt more easily to changing circumstances. That would be, if I could try to pin it down, that'd be it.
Excellent, thank you. And Prav, your work, you've done so much work that's really human-centric and really kind of hands-on, like global work, et cetera. I think one of the reasons I wanted to have like a philosophy-style crypto economic summit is I really think at this stage in blockchain technology, we need to be bringing in philosophy, but also pragmatic humanistic concerns to our design. So as someone who has done a lot of like work in the world with various types of people, like do you see in the work you've done, do you see any sort of element to groups that allows them to be more adaptable? Or do you see, like, what have you seen succeed in this sort of attempt to self-govern, in this social evolution?
So in this particular area, I think the specifics around anti-fragile are really key. So my background, I think as was mentioned, is I was one of the people that helped establish Doctors Without Borders in Canada. So Rwandan genocide, and did monitoring missions in Angola, other places. I've seen innovation and the hacker mindset from the ground up. Here in Vancouver, having done artworks in the back alleys of downtown East Side, you see the spread and what is possible across humanity. The challenges as well. The thing that has always astounded me is that under great pressure, when we think things could go no further, that they're going to crack, that this sudden complexity and evolution occurs. And it's in those places that I find that the human spirit and the way we organize, it comes from the ground up and from the top down. It is an emergent phenomenon. So within these places, when you find things happening in the underground and you find things also happening in the greater structures, and they start to come together in those vascular type of networks, when these touch points, that is where you get this kind of prickly, static, things start to jump back and forth, and they start to self-organize. Sorry?
Nice effect.
Yeah. So one of the parts is I'm just going to relate back to what maybe just step back to why Humanitas Capital and what we do. Simply because part of it is investment in this connection between, I heard the word used a lot earlier, which is love. Okay, love, and this other part of technology. How do these things mesh? And my sense is that humans, have this potential to act as an interface in an operating system, a new level of awareness for the planet under great evolutionary pressure. Right now, we are facing climate change, adaptation, and it's no longer, I think, a question of whether it's happening, it's just whether and how we're going to work with it. And to me, there's actually a great opportunity. The great evolutionary pressure that we have on us right now causes us to now look at how are we going to reform. And to me, blockchain technology as an operating system and the whole crypto economics that come into that provide us with a way that we can restructure and reform around the basic things that bring us forth.
Excellent, thank you. I had forgotten to mention at the beginning, we were supposed to have a fourth panelist who, because of transit issues, was not able to join us, but I very much love the work of Toni Lane Casserly, and this concept of love is something that comes forth in her work. She's working on reputation systems right now. And this is a really tricky problem, is like, okay, how can we create, like, it's hard enough to deal with the reputation systems face to face. So how can we create digital reputation systems that can flex with change, wherein if people have interpersonal conflicts, they can choose an opt-in path to resolution and then decide that that has been resolved and mark that in some way. I mean, this is becoming, as our interactions become increasingly digital, impersonation of each other's identities, things like that, getting hacked and stuff like that are serious problems. So just the piece on love, it is something that I think Doge is very much about. Like, I think that's what we tried to have this as a nice little tent of the Doge conference, that we can talk about concepts like love, forgiveness, and understanding that are often seen as far too corny for a crypto conference. Instead of ICO pitches, we've got hugs. Like, that's the plan for the weekend.
Yeah.
And there is something really elusive and beautiful in that, I think, that and it may be, I've suspected, and I'd like your thoughts on it. Like, basically, it seems that the human mind is designed evolutionarily to fear change, to fear anxiety, fight or flight, etc. But when great disruptive things happen in our communities, good or bad, it can kind of shock us out of that and just bring us together. Like, I worked at times with the Red Cross after like volcanoes and stuff like that. And the communities after a disruptive event had happened that put their lives in perspective, like, there was so much more flexibility and focus on love. So I think we need to formally acknowledge love within academia, within technology, et cetera, as a really legitimate and powerful force.
It's a great force for cohesivity and really bringing together, I think, the best of, when we talk about values, as in the previous panel, and in terms of what binds us. I think that in times of great strife, it is love and the way, and I said, proof of intention. What are we doing this for? Why are we doing it? And as technologists, as venture capitalists, whatever it is, why are we coming together to build this next framework? What is the reason? And I think these are quite existential questions that come up when you are facing, if in some case, literally oblivion, either as an individual, as a culture, as a species. And now, as the sapient level of this planet, we have an opportunity to combine our technological wizardry and create that, I think, that next cognitive layer of a self-regulating, the equivalent of when we moved from a sort of a reptilian mind to our prefrontal cortex. This is the opportunity that I think is at hand, and the intention with which we pursue it. There's going to be shadows and light in whatever we do. We're human beings, but in the same way, those shadows create a great opportunity for us to figure out how are we going to evolve. I think there's a great intentionality there. That's a fantastic opportunity for humanity and the planet.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a fundamental thing that humans want to deny chaos. They want to create systems that they understand, that they know that's going to happen, that they can feel safe in. And our whole society is a structure in an attempt to create that certainty about what can happen. But if we let that go so far, like the systems we build, the structures we build are necessarily insufficient because we can't possibly know what the future is going to bring. So we can't possibly build systems that are going to survive the future. And it's a trap that we fall into. And I think recent history, when we look, there was a great schism of ideology between communism and capitalism. And it was no means obvious which was better. And the pitch that communism was giving was that removal of chaos. Everyone would get what they need, and everyone would just give as to their ability. And capitalism didn't give such a strong promise. And I think we can understand the kind of collapse of the former system as the capitalist system was more able to adapt, more able to create technology, more able to process the new information from the future than the communist command and control system was. But I think we've kind of lost sight of that dynamic. And over the past 50 years, we've kind of made this deal between the nation state and the banking system. And the deal kind of is the banking system will keep everything stable and give everyone, all the government, all they need. And I think we've created fragile banking systems. Like the root of capitalism and the reason capitalism worked well is small businesses and networks of businesses where some can fail and that failure can provide information. And the success of capitalism is really a success of a decentralized system. And our nation state system and our banking system, like, very recently has taken control of the money, and they've used that as a means of taking randomness away from the system and providing predictability. And there's all sorts of people who have this 9-to-5 job in these banking positions and these other positions that are stable. But you can remove randomness for only so long, and eventually the pressure builds and the pressure builds. And I think we all, like, everyone I talk to seems to have like this conception that things aren't right with our economy. Things aren't right with our banking system. Like, we're just waiting for the next bit of chaos to come. So I really think that what's important, like, we can analyze that fragility in the banking system has happened. And we can see that cryptocurrency offers another way to do money that doesn't have the centralizing forces that the banking system has. Like, I think we have fallen into a trap in the West that our systems are much more fragile than we think. And we should move to more anti-fragile systems. And I think a peer-to-peer network that is quite simple, whose value proposition comes quite simply from a scarcity of the unit, can be used as a means of exchange and can replace the banking system we have.
That's a really good point. I think in terms of the, Taleb speaks about this, the barbell, right? The high risk and then the low risk piece, and the middle system as being actually the most fragile. And so in these times, under this kind of pressure, the barbell, the idea of having a highly diversified high risk system, but also something that is stabilized over a decentralized way in a true form, allows a kind of robustness, anti-fragility, which allows for an adaptation. So under great pressures that we're seeing in the banking system and in other governance systems, as things become more volatile, and we are now pretty much guaranteed for the next several 100,000 years, it is never going to be business as usual ever again. As long as humanity has been around, it's never been like this, and it's going to continue to increase. So in a way, we have a great opportunity here to, based on the work that is, and the ethos that Satoshi has put forth, and that is kind of cascading through the system as new ideas and regenerating in different forms. So with that, we have I think, a really interesting space in which continuous adaptation, understanding the second law of thermodynamics, in which entropy is embedded into the code, so to speak, and knowing that in light of that, we can constantly be deepening into complexity. So when we talk about the barbell, there's this complex layer, and then there's this very simple layer. So the complexity married with that simplicity is a way for us to move through this, and at the same time have this incredible opportunity to deepen our economic systems, to deepen our wisdom, our governance systems in ways that no one group can ever control us again. That's great, fantastic.
What's really promising about what you guys are moving to, in my mind, is moving into an age of complexity and moving into an age of anti-fragility, if you're okay with that term, is also about moving into a post-ideological age. So when you guys were talking, when Taylor, when you're talking about the contrast between, communism as a system and capitalism as a system, and their relative ability to sell themselves, and what we ended up with is kind of this state capitalism where they sort of bonded together, and we get, this what is essentially an anti-fragile system. What we have before us with stuff like Bitcoin, with the Satoshi white paper, is treating ideology as an engineering problem. It's no longer a matter of sort of trickle-down ideas where that you set fires in the mind and people get all excited about it, but it's not implemented. Implementation requires seeing the results of revolution. Here we have a situation that's more like, and you mentioned voice and exit. We named the event after the idea of exit, voice, and loyalty from Albert Hirschman. And the idea is, if you want to change a system within, you exercise voice. If you want to, and if you can't, that doesn't work. If the costs of exit are low enough, you just leave the system to start something new. This radical experimentation that blockchain and other distributed ledger technologies and holochain and all this other stuff enables people, this radical experimentation means you don't need to have, you can have all the ideological priors you want to, but you have to be able to test it, and it has to be able to survive. And that sort of iterative competition among systems, where people will gravitate between and among systems that have developed the best network effects, that have the best properties. You can have all the magical thinking you like. If it works, bless you. You've developed your own system, but that means we're in an age of post-ideology. Ideology becomes a lucky epiphenomenon of good engineering. And good culture building, frankly.
Well, I am thinking if anyone has any questions in the audience, we're getting kind of to the end here. Yeah, I think we can take maybe 3 questions.
Thanks, guys. So, money was never intended to be a long-term thing. It's an interim store of value, ultimately exchanged at some point for something else. And, those things that have true value, as you guys identified, are things like love, like the examples that you gave when there's a crisis and people rush in to help people they don't even know, et cetera. So that's an inherent human behavior, right? So how can we actually capitalize on that repositioning of the value so that people are actually focused on things that are truly meaningful versus what the system tells them is meaningful?
Doge.
Is that that is a satisfactory answer.
It's not our micro, I would have.
So, no, it's hard.
See, it's interesting. See, one context that locals have of our beloved friend here, Taylor. Taylor is probably one of our strongest Bitcoin maximalists at the Decontrol hackerspace. And it's so interesting, like when Prav was bringing up love and bringing up these things about value, there have been, because of your maximalist ideology and your very like straightforward Bitcoin, like use case of economic exchange, et cetera, Bitcoin is the way. We often assume you're not all about love and stuff. And there have been times when we're hanging out and we're like, oh, that's too corny for you. He's like, I like love. So it is something that like we're constantly kind of making this assumption that if you're being a pragmatic economist, that love can't also be in the room. So I feel like maybe part of the answer to that is like, I would like to believe that part of the answer to how we better align incentives in a more complex way towards values and towards social good is by having these conversations and making it cool to formally discuss love in a crypto economics summit. I'm just kind of opening that dialogue.
Yeah, I think this is actually quite critical to the movement en masse of what taps into every human being that is fundamental. The earlier panel talked about Maslow's hierarchy. And if we go into that top layer, you know, what does it mean to be in that top layer once you've got those other needs met? And in that, you can unpack that. And then that's, you know, this realm of love embodies and moves throughout all of those layers. Can all of those layers interact and bind? And I look at something happening south of the border in terms of the migrant children and the sudden movement of capital. And what does it mean if we were to take that and think about this as a global situation? And if we think about units of energy and this intention of love. So when there is a massive superstorm that doesn't move for 3 weeks over the South Pacific, what happens globally? Or when we can move clean energy from Europe to China because of, or to this Southeast Asia because of a massive earthquake. I'm just giving some hypothetical examples. But to me, embodied in that economic system are units of love. They are units of energy, they're units of capital, but there's something else that is the intention that accelerates and binds the movement. And if we are starting to generate systems and architectures that allow for that kind of decision-making, that natural flow between communities, between individuals based on our great achievement as human beings of empathy and sharing, and at the same time understand that transfers of value and opportunistic moments where one group may be able to harvest more energy and transfer that to another group in terms of whether that be currency or value or intention. I think we're talking about a whole new way of understanding what is being previously understood as something that was predatory to something that may still have those elements, but only in that it dials in and creates more anti-fragility.
Yeah, that's kind of where I wanted to go with it, is that punchline. And if you'll permit me, I wonder about the question of how you operationalize love, because let's just call them three sets. Let's call them the progressive, the conservative, and then libertarian. Okay. And they're all in a sense right in what they say. The progressives say we ought to love people. We ought to give them out of love if we can, if they have needs. The conservative is going to say yes, but that can be destructive. The libertarian is going to say, you know, what does this do to the markets or something? You know, so all of those things are great questions. All of those things are great positions, and they can be synthesized to some degree when we talk about the question of how you operationalize love. So, for example, there's what does Tom Shoes is a great model of corporate social responsibility. Every time you buy a pair of shoes, you have one that helps the poor in some country, right? So suddenly we have shipments of shoes out to parts of the world that are desperately poor. But what happens to the cobbler then in that part of the world? There's a displacement there. It's just like foreign aid. There were people who are in poor situations who had rice airdropped on them. What happens then to the agricultural sector of the recipients of that rice? To the delicate businesses that were or at least the shoots of industry that were beginning to form, and that's usually at first in agriculture in the poorest countries in the world. So it's not always the case that we can sometimes sort of drop largesse from the sky, which is operationalized love, and that can be destructive. There might be a panhandler in the street and you hand him $20, and that person goes and uses it on something that's destroying him or herself. It's hard. It's not to say that there's a right or wrong answer. It's just exceedingly difficult. So when we think about how we love, and sometimes the answer is tough love, sometimes the answer is smart love, and sometimes the answer is something in between. When I hear, and I don't think it's platitudes, I think a lot of people need to develop a disposition of love, for sure. But then the next question is how we do it in a smart way and in a productive way the recipient of that love can continue to ascend the stages of psychosocial development or Maslow's or whatever.
The critical part of that, and I'm in full agreement that there is this the airdrop nature, and we don't, and that's not the piece here. That I think it's really important that when we're talking about movements, whether it be of capital, of digital value, whatever it is, that there is also a counter and understanding that is, if it's moved there, it's because there is something there that is being seeded and fostered, and not necessarily just sort of like dropped in on top, that it is actually drawing energy from one place to another because that energy is needed there for a certain cohesiveness and catalyzation to occur, but not in such a way that it disrupts what is naturally forming from the emergent of that need that's there. And having it move along those lines, but with expedience. And I think this is where technology and some of our self-checking, error-correcting systems can come in terms of how that is modified, how those values are redistributed, are actually something that is actually within our means to do through communities deciding what they need, and through various types of consensus-based systems. And having that, we haven't talked about autonomous organizations yet, but I think in those kinds of systems, we have ways of creating architectures that will enable communities to decide how that energy is redistributed and architected in their communities.
That's absolutely right. But you're gonna get these. It's the difference between stasis and dynamism as a way of thinking, way of looking at the world. There was this group that was devoted to discussions of how to rebuild after Puerto Rico, for example, which had a terrible hurricane recently, right? And they're going to self-select, and there was one group that was very much into, well, let's build hyperloops, there, and these big sort of dirigisme projects. And then there's the other folks who are thinking, well, what is it that's going to allow? What is it going to be the subtler changes that are going to seed the economic conditions for the port cities, for example, that are going to allow for the unanticipated emergent prosperity? That's what you're talking about. Exactly. That's what I'm talking about. But there are a lot of people out there who just want to build grand things and start over and, just redistribute tons of money for these giant make-work projects that are usually boondoggles.
Yeah. I think I want to just maybe put this out there for people. If you haven't read Ursula Franklin, Real World Technology, this is a really key piece to understanding this, of what technology is and how it can be adapted into situations. And the basic premise is technology is how we use it. So if I have a stone, that stone in one place might be a meditation stool, in another it might be a hammer, in another it might be a foundation for a house. But it's still a stone. It's the same thing, but it's how it's applied. And my sense is that with the kind of technological and communication structures that are now global, and moving ever so rapidly in that direction, we have an opportunity for micro adaptations to situations and a kind of interoperability that allows for things to occur. And so I know Jeremy Rifkin, who speaks to the idea of smart cities and stewardship in terms of distributed nodes and adaptive climate change, speaks to how we are responsible in our place of being for, I think he says, 30,000 feet up, right? And how do we hold and know what the local adaptations are, and use that very intimate knowledge of our communities, of the various communities we're involved in, and the various needs of that place, the biological needs, the needs of the social needs, and use those resources and cultivate the local economies. So the other person that I'd like to point to is another Ursula. I'm glad I'm pointing out women as well. Ursula K. Le Guin, who, of course, is the science fiction author who also wrote a really great book called The Dispossessed, and it speaks to your piece of political, entities and these sort of the post ideological. And my sense is that when we start to move into this post-ideological world, we're moving into an opportunity which is, it's unknown. I mean, how many of us can see past the event horizon of what's coming? But the point is that we can be in a continuous adaptation sequence that allows for us to, on the micro level, and with a global infrastructure, start to move things and adapt to things in ways that just weren't possible 300 years ago. 100 years ago, 50 years ago, 10 years ago, right? And to me, we are moving towards a convergence of, I don't know if we're going to make it, but, at the same time, we have this incredible opportunity to become something more. I don't know what that is. I don't know whether that's a good thing or a bad thing or how it's going to turn out, but I'm all in for, let's see what happens.
I don't know if we're going to make it either.
Yeah, I think we have time for the one more question. Is that okay?
So I mean, I just wanted to say, first of all, like, just fantastic panel. This is like, kind of stuff tickles my brain. So the analogy of the moving barbell and, like, moving from simplicity to complexity, and how you tied that in with the capitalism versus socialism. I assume capitalism is very low complexity and socialism is maybe higher complexity. I don't know, but I do want to kind of tie this back to the premise of the talk, which is fragility and anti-fragility. And I don't know if it's fair to mention, like, DNA or biodiversity. If we're looking at that as an anti-fragile thing, right now we're kind of facing unprecedented species loss and loss of biodiversity. And is it fair to actually call DNA anti-fragile in that light? I mean, Daniel Dennett made the argument that how intelligent were sheep to have found humans. So, to a certain extent, it is working, but is it though? I don't know. Is that a question?
Yeah, I think that's a question.
Yes, it's working, but we're losing something incredibly valuable when we're losing all the biodiversity that we are losing at this point in time. And as the expression of DNA that has achieved consciousness and achieved the ability to self-reflect, I think we should be very, like, you're talking about values before. What should we value? I think biodiversity is top of that list. And although DNA is, I think, an anti-fragile concept, and DNA is going to survive in the cockroaches and the rats when we get finished with the place. So yes, it definitely is.
Yeah, I want to add to that too. I maybe misspoke or I misheard, but you said, capitalism tends to be simple, where socialism tends to be maybe flip that, or, but yeah, well, it's I think the way I like to think about it is whenever economists, for example, use machine metaphors versus biological metaphors. I'm always really suspicious of people, economists in particular, who use machine metaphors for the economy, because the extent to which we can see the economy as a biological system, the better off we're going to be, I believe, in terms of developing anti-fragile economies. Because really biomimicry is where it's at in developing all of our systems going forward. Nature and the planet has had billions of years of iteration cycles to get stuff right. And there are patterns in that we can look at and adapt to, and there's so much value in that. When we try to think that we are somehow superior to what billions of years of evolution has done, we're kidding ourselves. So we ought to just look to the best and try to, at the very least, mimic that environment and that beautiful natural environment, to find how we can work harmoniously within it and in a sense, worship the value that is given us and the information that's giving us and the way we can organize ourselves. Our new systems of collective intelligence will look more like biological systems, in my view, than it will be any massively planned thing.
Yeah.
So I think we are at the end of our time. This is a fascinating topic. I'm biased in thinking that. But we are leading into our indoor picnic lunch at which all the speakers will be sitting. So, yeah, would you like to?
And somebody told me that anytime I go speak anywhere, I should shamelessly plug my book, which is hard for a Southern boy to do.
Do it.
But if you guys can find this guy right here, The Social Singularity, which is on a lot of these topics, on your Amazon Kindle, at probably $4 Canadian, it would certainly help me tweak the algorithm, even though I got to give a pound of that flesh to Jeff Bezos. I'd sure appreciate it.
Awesome.
The Social Singularity. And my name's Max.
Yeah. And on the same note, I'd like you to point you to Humanitas Capital. Have a look at what we're doing. We are investing in a new operating system for the planet. We are looking for the best, the brightest people on the mission.
And we're Decontrol. Our hackerspace is really dirty right now, but you can come visit it. It's a couple blocks from here.
Well, that's why I like hanging out there.
It's full of balloons and stuff. So there is going to be, when we file out, we will lead people towards lunch. You're going to, around where the workshop rooms are, there are boxed lunches for speakers, sponsors, etc. I kind of feel like we've got enough in general. So if you're hungry and you're not sure if you get a lunch, stick around and ask us. I kind of think we're solid on this. It's lunches. Some people reserved lunches. The rest will just have to go wild and scrap through the available options. Let us know if you're vegetarian or vegan, and we'll reserve one of those options for you if we didn't already speak with you about it. And smoothies for all. So we're going to have an indoor picnic and then reconvene at 3 for a panel on consensus. I wanted to just yet again really give a shout out and thanks to all of our sponsors. We have these beautiful banners that Tana Poe, our in-house artist, this and the ones out there, she beautifully decorated for us. And we have some artistic renderings on Sunday of various sponsor logos, which is pretty cool. She got really creative with that. So yeah, we'll reconvene hopefully just before 3. If you want to go out for lunch, we partnered with a couple of local restaurants within walking distance, and a message went out through Whova and probably to your email if you're not on Whova, with a list of the restaurants and what discounts you can get with your rainbow band. So we will reconvene around 3. I think that's all the housekeeping, right? And come talk to these folks and one another, of course.